Thank you so much. I'm still super flattered thinking back to months ago when you invited me and invited Mike to do this because I don't really feel like I'm the same kind of poet that you often have, but I still really appreciate it and hope that everyone will enjoy themselves. I tried to organize a handful of poems to go along with the timeline that we're reading with tonight, and I was trying to figure out like what do I write about the most because I have written a lot of dark, like sad poetry. Like I'm almost becoming a cliche as a poem writer these days. Like my poems predict all the bad things that are about to happen to me, like before I know that they're going to happen. So I tried to make it somewhat a mix, but I apologize. There's a bit of heaviness in there. So I don't even know why I'm apologizing. Who cares? Poetry can do what it wants. But I write a lot about relationships, particularly with my kids, with my students, with the adults in my life. And so I'm going to start with a couple about my kids. And this is the one actually that is in the anthology you just held up, Annette, which was I was super grateful to be involved. It's called A Terrible Piece. Oh, before I read, can you guys hear me okay? Like, am I doing that weird garbly thing? Okay. Because sometimes when I Zoom with my boss, he turns into a like demented drunk robot, and I just don't want to read my poems that way to you, if that's okay. A Terrible Piece. After ice cream in downtown Egg Harbor, I thought we'd drink this nautical view for 10 minutes, 20 taps. But those rocks, they begged to be crawled, navigated, discovered, and my young children obliged. This hard stretch of nature, manhandled by machinery, to live a new way alongside this arresting bay, dusty copper-hued and coral-toned, is a paradox border, both jumbled and precise, haphazard and purposeful. Like them, I suppose, these children, they know who they are, what they can do, which series of slants their footing will negotiate. Watching them, raising them, instills a terrible peace. As we broke into a second hour, fingering the giant jagged necklace of the marina's edge, I watched in fearful awe as they reached and leapt, and I knew. Although this fierce, deep bay of present moment in which we floated would be fogged memory before long, I will always watch them this way, fascinated and afraid, as I feel when gazing across eye-widening water, sparkling the darkest tones at the heart of a sapphire, the rocks and waves, both sharp cuts and peaks, and smooth valleys too. Another paradox. Like them, I suppose, like all of this. It's really fun watching you clap. I know that, like you said, it takes something away, but it is pretty fun. And actually, the fun of that poem was that we were just there again a couple months ago, and Lucy desperately said the first thing we had to do was walk along the rocks at Egg Harbor. And I said, well, if I have time, I want to go pick up this poetry book that I managed to get a poem in. And she said, oh, what's the poem about? And I said, this, what you're doing right now, which was just like the craziest coincidence. This is the first poem I ever got picked up by somebody, which was sort of fun, and I still kind of love it, even though sometimes when I look back at old poems, I don't always feel that way. It's called Magnets and Maps. I consider the magnetism that tethers nearly every mother to her son, to her daughter. Inside this enchantment, what of mine is subsumed? What of theirs is squashed if my needs fly free? Once caged birds rightly, wildly roaming their destined, unseen migration lines. Am I in motion, or only imagine that I am? Once I felt stretched in all directions but forward, pulled to him, to her, away from my own self, space, time, and plans by their eager, demanding hands. Now I see we move in chaotic concert, orbiting each other in wavering, wobbling paths, moving towards and away, crave and resent minutes spent together, a maddening math. I see now we were always moving, all of us, even me, but so was the map, creating a falsehood of stillness. I only thought my feet were stationary. Now and again, we all move parallel, me just ahead of my tethering too, one a ball of flames licking at my left hand, the other an undulating stream lapping my right. And now I see how I move, what I can be. I am the wind igniting her flames, skimming his surface, filling my ears with my own rushing song, sometimes heard as a roar, sometimes only a whisper. We hurtle along, magnetically bonded, unsure the imagined map was ever there.
Very nice, Katie.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I know, like, I'm sure a lot of you who, I think the majority of you write poetry. I know you do from hanging out with you. I like when I can remember exactly why and where I was when I needed to write this poem. And I was at the second floor of the Appleton Public Library when I needed to write this poem. And I wrote it like a few days after Mary Oliver died, which is why it's called For Mary Oliver. Very original title. The day after you died, I walked up to the second floor of the library to work on a poem about a student who described her despair, mirthlessly quipping that she tries to avoid the tumult that is her home as often as she can. Rushing to catch time between one obligation and another, to catch hold of the words before they dissolved, silent exultation, an empty table 12 feet from the landing, this short journey interrupted by the unassuming narrow metal temporary display informing me that the Dewey of the month was the 800s. And there you were, along with Charles Simic and Nikki Giovanni in a petite collection of English sonnets. One of those barely audible wonder gasps passed over my January cracked lips as I picked up Charles. I had you and Nikki at home and whispered, of course. Of course the librarians would have a Dewey of the month. In planning the display, one surely said it mustn't be fancy. And of course they knew it should be the 800s this month, when you exhaled forever, leaping across the divide, perhaps across a modern babbling Styx, winding through a wood of deep trees, dark and sparkling, but not sinister, perhaps atop the gliding back of a bird, feathered tips skimming across sky and season, perhaps, and more likely, moving to the beyond in a new way that not even poetry can crystallize, though it tries. Our lives on this side of the veil are embroidered with the tries. What is it like, we want to ask you? What do you see? We can only imagine. And we will, as you gently directed us to do, paying attention, open to wonder, telling the stories as our own journeys wind through our deserts of repentance and forests of discovery, doing our best to love what we love without pretense or pause.
Very nice.
Thank you. So let's get dark. A couple about my job, actually just one about my job. I have written a lot of poems about my students. This one though, unfortunately though it's a few years old, just keeps being true. And the only thing I realized about as I read it yesterday is that I have the date 2:15 written in the poem as 2:15, but I realized when I say it out loud, it sounds like 2:15 on the clock. So I guess what I just want to tell you ahead of time is 2:15 is February 15th. And this is called What We Need to Do at School. Thursday morning, 2:15, not 24 hours after Parkland ceased to be primarily a geographical location and became this week's name of violence and death, my job is to lead my students through this semester's Alice drill. It was scheduled weeks ago. It's the kind where we construct a barricade in front of my door using filing cabinet tables, boxes of supplies, stacked high and deep. It's the one where we discuss the legitimacy of using the hundreds of books lining the south wall as projectiles to disrupt potential violence. We are learning how to cope. We practice. Daily, I run other drills, pushing them. How many sentences can you successfully stack? Now a barricade built against ignorance and stasis, things which can slowly take you apart, so slowly you don't feel it. We do walkthroughs of what it's like to encounter words unknown, which are their own kind of threat, ceasing only once they are taken on, taken apart. Today, I'm evacuating them of their comfort zones to try their hands at poetry, to mimic Jackie Fox's autobiography as a form of personal release and evolution. This is not easy to do at 8 a.m. with at-risk credit deficient teenagers, but I know that it's an uncomfortable kind of necessary. Their faces stitch up into tired patterns of strain as they attempt to please themselves or me. To play along, to manage this strange and painful task, I had to ask them, do you want to do Alice at the beginning of class or the end? They choose to push it off to the end, but we can hear the nearest classrooms have chosen to get it over with. As we write in silence, my principal and resource officer rattle handles and bang on doors, momentarily mimicking sounds of intrusion. We look around, unable to pretend we don't hear this unsettling sound. I say, I don't know what's crazier, me asking you to write poems so early in the morning, or doing it to the sound of us pretending that armed intruders are like tornadoes. They say nothing. There is nothing to say at 8 a.m. when all available emotional energy is being used to write a reflective and honest poem, when the truth is that we need to do both of these crazy things, or we might die. I will say at the moment, what's so fun is seeing people that I know are not in Appleton. There's many of you that I know are not in Appleton, but two of you out there are my neighbors. one of the, yes, there's Carla waving. She's right down the street behind me, and Susan's right over there. And both have been teachers over the years in varying settings, and I know can relate, unfortunately, to many elements of that poem. Shifting over to other kinds of relationships. This one's called The Kitchen. We did not kill each other when we renovated the kitchen, nor did we celebrate either. No deep sigh of exhausted relief, like the kind after sex that's been denied for days or weeks because of travel or illness or tension or the almost imperceptible drains on the battery of bonded harmony. We did not smile on the giddy high of taking in the transformation, amazed that all the measuring, cutting, sanding, painting, and mistake fixing had converted a dated space into a modern haven of our own. In fact, the baseboards sat unattached for nearly 3 years. We looked past them, and when we couldn't, we said little. No yelling about the goddamn baseboards, just a raspy sigh of resignation that this room we share was almost beautiful. And then, yeah, the next, all of them actually have to do with relationships. My life's in a bit of a transition right now, and I realized about 6 months ago that my poems know these things are happening before I know they're happening. And I'm guessing a lot of you have had that happen in your writing too. Any good writing workshop person or coach will tell you, you have to start writing to figure out what's going on. You know, you just start writing, and then you see what you have to write about. So this one's called What Isn't True But You Want to Be. Oh, and by the way, when I started writing this poem, I started writing it into my phone, which was sitting in one of those weird doohickeys you put in your car to like do the GPS. Except I find that like 70% of the time I use it to do a voice memo to write a poem, which feels both really smart and dangerous. And I promise not to do it as often, which I'm actually lying about. But I thought when I started writing this poem, that it was just about, it was like an ode to my shitty old car, which I still have. Love you, car, knock wood. And then isn't that funny how you start writing about something, you're like, this is about my shitty car. And then you get to the end and you're like, oh no, it's not about that. Okay, good to know. So this is called What Isn't True But You Want to Be. I find it both fascinating and absurd that I can think, I love this old car, can thank its cargo hold coated with dog hair and a strange bit of magic which stretches it just enough to enclose nearly anything. It has hauled long lumber cuts, awkward chairs, and raucous dogs, beloved oversized belongings from one home to another. I can tell the newer model's shape would have me renting a truck more often. It lacks a smooth ride, but impresses me. It's almost 20. I feel like you can say that about a 17-year-old car, that you can round up. Gloss over what isn't true but you want to be. Rust grows over the wheel wells like industrial moss. The check engine and maintenance required lights take turns popping on, one a jagged rune, the other a delicately abbreviated invitation, both glowing orange. The color that says, it's not the end, but there's a problem. I have a habit of staying in love with old things, even when the orange warning lights flicker on, which is both a testament to my loyalty and a comment on my tendency toward misplaced loyalty, which is a nicer way of saying how often I fail to take apart things which are breaking, to scuttle a hull that won't hold. So often people say, I was secretly happy that it died. I was itching for a new one. Is anyone immune to this feeling? A coworker, your lover, God? We are all just navigating the roads from here to there, thin black and gray ribbons of pavement or pain, demarcating the tension between hanging on a little longer, squeaking out a few more miles, and scrapping it all to start again.
Good job.
Thank you. I'm trying to keep up with things you're saying in the chat. I'm sorry if it seems like I'm ignoring you. I just can't. I will. I have just two more, if that's okay. I did time myself yesterday, but I just want to make sure that's okay. Yeah, good. Okay. This one's called New Vows. I can't ask anyone to be my everything. Barry White's good intentions duly noted. I will only ask that they be a beloved something to me. No Swiss Army knife as person, improbably possessing every kind of capacity to be alluring and dependable and a good cook and handy and spiritually in tune and my unpaid therapist and my carpenter and loving and cheering and sturdy and be even one thing to me, but let it be precious and dear and singular. Be a blossoming tree, be a hot cast iron pan of comfort food, be a glittering stained glass window, be a marvelous millefiori paperweight, intricate and unusual. Be a sports car, sleek and sexy, be a novelty umbrella, be a washable wool sweater, be an open window to the sound of rain and thunder. Be a hand holding a cool cloth on a fevered forehead, be a subtly spicy pacifying wine, be a high-end bike lock or chic pendant lamp, be a stand of swaying ferns or tuned piano, be a smooth brushed metal fountain pen, weighty and worldly and polished. Be anything to me, I don't care. Just don't leave me bare-armed on the coldest day or unshaded on the hottest. I promise I will shield myself on my own most of the time. Care for me any kind of way, for the unfiltered joy of it, the fizz of love's generosity, and whatever I can be, whatever I can give will be yours. And that brings me to my last one. Next Year. It's titled Next Year. This is the most recent poem I've written. I don't know what your all different methods are of writing, but I'm sure I'm not alone in carrying both around a notebook and, as I said, the talk to text function in my phone. And sometimes I walk long walks a lot, and I tend to stop and talk stuff into my phone as I go, which works really well, except for the 20% of the time that the phone just hears me say something really different. And then I look back at it later and I'm like, that's not, It's like a weird fragment of a dream. And you're like, well, that's not at all a thing. But this one managed to come together in the end as I walked half of it. Next year. I'm going to seed my lawn with soft, sweet clover, what's left of it anyway, because next year I plan to steal my lawn back bit by bit from my lawnmower and British Petroleum and the epitaphs of my great-grandchildren. Sorry, lawn, you're about to become hostas and mulch, and no, I am not actually sorry at all. Next year, I'm going to plant so many different kinds of basil right outside my door that my fears will choke on their spicy cloud of airy joy, and I will buy not a few, but a whole shelf of the impatiens at Aldi marked down to $2 because the refrigerated truck got caught in a traffic jam outside Chicago, and they wilted in a way that tricks the uninitiated into thinking they are dead when they are just very, very thirsty. Next year, I will paint a single wall dark teal and wonder if this is the right gold velvet to keep it company. I will spray paint old porch lights and watercolor paint geometric shapes and paint my name with a dollar store sparkler, even if I spend the 4th of July alone. Next year, I'll have to write new mental narratives for the noises in the night, because I'll only be able to blame them on my children half the time. I'll write grocery lists for meals I always meant to make that only suited me, and as I cook, I'll sing at the top of my lungs instead of the bottom. I'll write journal entries in invisible ink so I won't be tempted to relive my mourning or my indecision. Next year, I'm sure I will still wear my sadness like a thick, heavy blanket, but next year I will remember that that's all it is and shrug it off. But because I am not some hardened, slovenly beast, I won't just leave it there. I'll pick it up, fold it with care, set it to the side. I won't pretend my grief isn't real, every tear across it a stitch in this long and lonely time.
but what a relief it will be to know that I can sometimes set it to the side, to know that I didn't need it as a shroud because I was dead. I was just very, very thirsty. Thank you again.
Very nice, Katie. Nice read.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Great stuff.
That was a great reading.